The Andy Pollin Show.
We got to go after this with everything we got, thinking they're going to come with everything they got.
I'll start off by saying I'm bored, I'm broke, and I'm back.
The Andy Pollin Show on ESPN 630 starts right now.
So if you know me, you can not only set your watch by me, you can set your calendar by me. Almost every year for the last 54 years, I have spent usually the first week of August in Vermont. Dear friends, going back decades and decades. Sadly, my good friend has passed away, but his family still invites me, and I show up just about every year at their beautiful lakefront property and hang out with them for a week and hike and canoe and barbecue and all the good things that you do on a summer vacation. But now I'm back, ready to start the football season, which I guess has begun. If you want to put any stock into preseason, I don't put much into it. But what we saw on Friday night was an absolute debacle. I'll get to that and reaction from Dan Quinn on that. I'm catching up on a number of things. I love to listen to Brent Musberger speak. And while I was away, Brent Musberger finally got in the Pro Football Hall of Fame, long overdue. And he got in partly because of a letter that Dan Patrick had written. Patrick said, wait a minute, Brent Musburger's not in the Hall of Fame? Are you kidding me? So thanks to his letter, Brent finally got in this past weekend, and he had some really good stories to tell about that. So we'll get to that later this hour. And Steve Kerr was on the Glue Guys podcast. And if you're not familiar with this, it's quite good. I really enjoy what they do. And I'm going to play some of that coming up in the next hour. I do want to give you a story, though, from vacation. This was kind of fun. And I did turn 67 during my vacation for whatever that's worth. But, we take turns cooking dinner and sometimes buying groceries and things like that. So a week ago, it was my night to cook. And I like to make chicken on the grill and provide, the other parts of the dinner as well, the side dishes. They have great corn this time of year in Vermont, so I got some of that. And I also got some stuff for a fruit salad, including a watermelon and various things. And it looked like, as I was checking out, that clearly I was getting ready for either a party or a big dinner with a lot of people. And I think we had like 11 people up there at the time. So anyway, it's at the Grand Union in Rutland, Vermont. And rolling the items through, the large amount of chicken, the watermelon, the fruit, and then comes a beer. They actually, in Vermont, they allow grocery stores to sell beer. I guess they do in Virginia. Where I live in Maryland, you have to buy it from a package store. But in Vermont, you can buy beer and wine in the grocery store. So about a 12-pack of beer, and I'm rolling it through. And the woman checking me out says, birthday. And I go, well, yeah, and it had just been my birthday the day before, but the stuff that I was buying was indicative of like a birthday celebration. I go, well, we got a lot of people at the house. She says, birthday. And what she was doing was she was carding me. So I gave my birthday, and that was enough. So I thought that was funny. I thought it was pretty funny that she, I thought, was making like chit-chat. Like, oh, you must be having a birthday party here. No, birthday. What's your birthday so I can make this legal? I'm full of gray hair. Anybody that would look at me would obviously know that I'm over 21. But I guess for legal purposes, anytime somebody buys alcohol in that particular grocery store, she's been instructed to ask for his or her birthday. So I gave my birthday, which put me, unfortunately, well past the age of 21, and all was good. All was not good with the Commanders. I watched the tape of it yesterday. I was still out of town when they played on Friday night at New England, and this fella who does the sidelines for them, I believe his name is Colbert. I mean, what exactly does he do? Most of his questions are, how great is it? Oh, it's this great. How great is it to have such and such on your team? Oh, yeah, it's really great. Nobody's going to say, well, rather have a better tight end, So anyway, I don't quite get that, but I thought Brian Mitchell and Chick Hernandez did a fine job of doing the game. I just don't get it with this sideline guy. But it was just an awful game. I mean, it starts out with Travion Henderson, who was on the Ohio State national championship team, and in a football uniform and back on a football field, other than practice for the first time since they won the national championship back in, was that still January when they won? I guess it was January. This gets longer and longer. Clearly, Colston Yankoff, the backup tight end and special teamer, was held on that. He might have been able to make the tackle, but the game starts out with a 100-yard kickoff return and just kind of devolved from there. I think the Patriots had over 100 yards rushing at the half. It was 27-3. They were playing starters, which is okay. That's a little bit different. Washington rested 30 guys. They didn't play most of those that were on the field are not starters, and many of them won't make the team. Johnny Newton, who I guess will be a starter this year with Jonathan Allen gone, he looked good. He looked pretty good out there. Chris Moore, who's a veteran, has been around a long time, had a bad drop and should have caught that ball to keep the drive alive. Drake May was pretty much doing what he wanted against that defense, walked in for one touchdown. There were a couple of highlights there. They call him Bill Croxy Merritt, running back from Arizona. He showed some bursts. There's always these guys, this time of year that do that. I don't think it's anything to get overly excited about. Antonio Gibson, who used to play here, now with the Patriots, he had a 62-yard kickoff return. They had a pair of interceptions. Sam Hartman looked like Mary Hartman, if you're old enough to remember that reference. Josh Johnson looked okay, but it's Josh Johnson, 39 years old, has played for everybody, and I mean literally everybody, 14 different teams, including several of them twice, including the one that he's on now, although they were the Redskins the last time he played there. And in fact, one of the sideline interviews was with Bobby Wagner, and he said, we're doing a lot of damage to ourselves. Well, that was an interesting comment. Self-inflicted damage, 13 penalties, 98 yards, the 48-18 score. Sometimes a score isn't indicative of how the game goes. This one was. Could have been worse. They were bad. This was Dan Quinn post-game at New England Friday.
I'm the one that has to keep the standard, and we miss it. I missed it. And so as much as there's some things I liked from the practice, there's some things that I really disliked from tonight's performance. But you know what? It all counts, and it's all part of it. Adam and I have got plenty of tape to go watch, and we got a nice little stretch here in between this game and our next one, and I expect some of that sloppiness to get going. Get your ass kicked, and you were in the fight the whole time, and I can live with that. The ones that I don't are like, man, when we didn't play to the style, the attitude, the penalties, those are the ones like, I can almost live with any result when you put it all in, do it right. But when it's sloppy and not to the standards, that burns my ass.
Yeah, and these were guys who were trying to make the team, whose chances don't look that great. So yesterday, they brought in 14 players for tryouts. Half of them were linebackers. They did sign one. His name is Duke Riley. He's been around for a while, played 8 years, was with the Dolphins last year, and is known as a very good special teams player. So clearly, with what he saw on tape after watching it following Friday night's game, concerned him. And obviously, when you give up a 100-yard kickoff return and you give up a 62-yard kickoff return, that's not good. And that was one of the focuses of the early questions that he took yesterday before practice.
That's our flagship on the special team side, especially the kickoff and the kickoff return. We take great pride in that. And so to see that not go down, first thing, man, like acknowledge it, put it up, show both of them where the errors were. Good news, like this is how we also fix that. But it was important to show that. It's important to say when it's right, but it's important to show this isn't to the standard. This is how we've got to do it, and I'm certain we'll get that fixed.
Well, one of the things you wonder about too, not just the field goal that Matt Gay missed, but was there something on the kickoff? Because they were as many kickers as they had here last year. I think there were 4 different kickers for this team last season, and as the carousel went round and round, they did do a good job on kickoffs, and it's Quinn's theory that even if you give up a kickoff to the 30-yard line or even past the 30-yard line, that the tackle on that kickoff fires up the defense when they get on the field. So he almost always kicks off, rarely kicks it out of the end zone for the touchback. Doesn't like to do that. So just wonder, it's not just Matt Gay missing a makeable field goal on Friday night, but it was also that in the head-to-head practice that they had with the Patriots leading up to that, he had missed a field goal. He missed a short field goal in practice yesterday. And, makes you wonder, are they going to bring somebody in just to, make sure? Now, they've given Gay a good contract, and I believe a lot of it is guaranteed. So they don't want to cut him like, last year because of all the issues that they had to go through so many kickers. This year they wanted to have a veteran and somebody who's proven it before and someone that they can, set it and forget it like Ron Popeil. But as far as, even with the 14 guys that they brought in yesterday, none of them were kickers.
Totally fair question. It's not where we're at, but we've got a lot of faith and belief in Matt, and there's a lot for us to get better at. And at that position, it's technical, and you got to make sure, the issues are really strong and really capable to go, and I'm certain he'll do that.
Yeah, most coaches. I mean, no coach is going to say, yeah, we're really concerned about that missed field goal in a meaningless exhibition game, and therefore we're going to go all out and try and find new kickers. You got to express confidence in the guy, especially one that you gave guaranteed money to. So I don't think anything's going to happen, but, another bad performance a week from tonight against Cincinnati. You never know. As far as fixing everything, and again, a lot of players on the field Friday night who are not going to be on the team, and that many of the 30 who sat will be playing and playing the majority of the snaps. But this is a team that, and I think Brian Mitchell said this during the broadcast a couple of times, that they did not have energy out there. Now, you'd think that the Patriots playing veterans, guys who've been there before, knowing how to tune up for the regular season, they might not have as much juice, whereas you've got guys who are trying to make the team for Washington, and they just didn't seem to have the energy. Now, maybe they were a little bit tight. Maybe it was, hey, this is our opportunity. We're not going to have any veterans in uniform, so we can go out there and do it. Maybe that was part of it, but it just seemed flat. And this is about as angry as you will hear Dan Quinn at a news conference vowing that this will not happen again.
There's really like a standard that we want, and when we nail it, I'll say it. And you may not be able to control the outcome or the reps, but we can control our play style. And I am certain that will look different.
Coach, kind of based on that, this team, as well as yourself, hangs their hat on competition. So aside from maybe some of the penalties and the mental mistakes that took place on Friday, how do you feel about the way the team competed? And if it wasn't up to that standard, then how do you address that now? Yeah,
we have a process. So we like to, after the game, discuss it all. We call it Tell the Truth Monday. And it's a time not to place blame, but to show the examples of what went right, what didn't, what needs addressing, how do we work on that, and then lastly, and probably most important, like what's the action you're going to put behind it? To say if this happened or this technique or this false start or this penalty, acknowledging it is one thing. But then like now here's the individual plan to say this can't repeat the mistake. And that's process that I like to put together with them and knowing, hey, this is style, identity. We have to have that part right first above all. Penalties and, field position and, not getting enough takeaways, being minus, like those are all things that contribute, to why we didn't win. But above all else, I want to make sure our play style is right. The running, the hitting, the physicality, like that's above everything.
Yeah. So, in the old days, you'd have the guys out on the field hitting the crap out of each other. It doesn't really work that way anymore because you're limited in the amount of hitting that you can do in practice. But what he saw was a very flat effort. Even though they're backup guys and many of them won't make the team, you got to set the tone, and the tone was terrible there. As far as the Terry McLaurin situation goes, if you go back a couple of months and you'd say on August 11th he still isn't signed, I said, you got to be kidding me. And I really thought that sometime last week when I was away on vacation that they would have had a deal worked out. But it's getting closer and closer here, and you're hearing numbers that they're like, $8-9 million apart per season. I mean, crazy stuff like that. And to Jaden Daniels' credit, he is so savvy. You would think that a guy who developed that chemistry with Terry McLaurin in year one and knows that a great deal of the success that he could potentially have this year could be tied to Terry McLaurin, and the longer this goes, I think the greater chance of injury if McLaurin gets on the field. I'm saying if. He seems to be, dug in on this, and he's got a year left on his contract, and conceivably the team could say to him, okay, well, we can't work out a deal. Start playing. We'll talk during the season if you want to. If not, we'll see how the season goes, and if we need to franchise you, we will. And you might think that there would be some signals from Daniels like, hey, guys, let's go. I'm cheap this year. I'm still under a rookie deal. We need to get Terry worked out. What's going on here? I haven't heard anything like that. He's been very careful with his words. He's saying he's focusing on himself. He says I can control what I can control. But it was pretty clear from the game, not that, McLaurin would have played anyway, but also during the joint practices last week. This is Adam Kilgore in the Post today. Last week at New England, during the Commanders' joint practice with the Patriots, Daniels heavily fed Zach Ertz, Deebo Samuel, and running back Austin Eckler, able to complete passes to almost no other receivers. Even when it's at full strength, Daniels carries a massive burden for the offense. The Commanders' current wideout setup asks even more of him. So I think they want to get him signed. I was asked a couple of questions about Deebo yesterday at his news conference and was very complimentary about him. I mean, it's getting to the point where that may be his top guy going into the season. I can't imagine the McLaurin will hold in now. He's in camp but not participating in any practices. I can't imagine that this is going to bleed into the regular season, but it could. It could. So that's a real concern on August 11th. And the longer this goes, I think the worse it gets for both sides. And I also believe that there is a greater chance of injury if Terry McLaurin misses all of training camp. And I don't think at this point, I can't even imagine he's going to see any preseason action. Even if he's signed today, I think it's highly unlikely he plays a week from tonight against Cincinnati. And then they have the final exhibition game against Baltimore where nobody ever plays. They're just looking for some guys who might make the practice squad or 53rd man or something like that. So at this point, we could almost guarantee that even if McLaurin is signed to an extension and he's happy, that the first game action that he's going to see is against the Giants in the opener. So that's where we are. Coming up, Brent Musberger on his induction in the Hall of Fame, and a really good story about, it's a good story anyway, but the story behind the story of the bar fight with Jimmy the Greek. It's the Andy Pollin Show, ESPN 630.
The Andy Pollin Show on ESPN 630, the sports capital.
Back from vacation, getting ready to roll into football season. I don't think I have anything coming up. It'll be a day for Yom Kippur and maybe Thanksgiving, but that's about it. So expect to be here just about every day. Knock for Micah. Hopefully stay healthy. Although I've missed only 3 days for illness since 1985. So in 40 years, pretty good. Brent Musberger, Dan Patrick found out a few years ago, was not in the Pro Football Hall of Fame. They have the Pete Rozelle Award for excellence in broadcasting or significant contribution to the game. I mean, Brent Musberger invented the modern pregame show. You are looking live. It's unbelievable that he wasn't. Chris Berman got in like 20 years ago. Chris Berman should not be going into the Hall of Fame before Brent Musberger. That's insane. So Dan Patrick found out what he had to do. He called the Hall of Fame and found out who he needed to write a letter to. A letter was written, and they went, "Oh yeah, Brent deserves to be in the Hall of Fame." So I was out last week, so I couldn't react to this last week. But Sunday before yesterday, or I guess maybe it was Saturday, they had the Hall of Fame induction. And that was a little different for the Pete Rozelle Award. They didn't get up and talk like the players who went in did, but there was a special luncheon that took place the day before, and Brent Musberger finally got his due, and he talked about it with Dan on Monday or Tuesday of last week.
I have to say that I was shocked when Jane Kennedy was brought in to introduce me, okay, at the banquet that night. Completely unexpected. And of course, she, along with Phyllis George, worked on the NFL Today and Irv Cross and Jimmy the Greek. Jane's got a book out called Plain Jane, and she's a great story. I recommend that for her. But then I want to compliment the city of Canton, Ohio. You know, this is their biggest weekend. People were so nice in the committee. And oh, by the way, I had at least 2 people mention Dan Patrick needs to bring his show into Canton for the Hall of Fame. Okay, they came right to me, and I said, "Listen, I'll mention this, Dan, because we had over 100 Hall of Famers show up. So yes, I so appreciate the honor, and so does the family. But I was a kid in a candy store when they started introducing all these guys that I had covered. Dan Fouts did a fantastic job. They bring them out to a stage, and then they set a couple of rows on either side, and they bring out the new Hall of Famers. And, the 4 guys who were inducted this year had such great stories when they came out. I'll start with Sterling Sharp. He was the only one of the 4, by the way, who was a first-round draft choice, okay, by the Green Bay Packers. And then it was so heartwarming when he and Shannon hugged each other up on the stage. Shannon presented him with the gold jacket. First brothers to make the Pro Football Hall of Fame. And I couldn't resist. I got over to Sterling. I whispered in his ear, Eli Manning will never forgive you. You know,
they beat Eli to the punch there of going into the Hall of Fame. Yes, yeah. But I don't know why it took so long, and maybe you're not the right person to ask this, but you're a Hall of Famer, and
Right.
and I'm very happy. You know, and a lot of this, just like with John Facenda, he was the voice of the NFL,
Exactly.
and I just said, don't forget about who helped us get here to a multi-billion-dollar organization, company. And I'm glad you got to experience that. I wish that Irv Cross had been around. Obviously Jimmy the Greek. People that you were with when you did the first pregame show. Do you have any idea if that was how successful that was going to be when you started?
Well, I like the idea that we were going live. Remember now, the pregame show on CBS prior to the NFL Today had been called Countdown to Kickoff. Pat Summerall and Jack Whitaker, they taped it on Friday night. Okay? And it was Bob Wessler's idea. Let's do this live, and then the halftimes and the postgame. I felt sort of an immediate impact, especially when Mike Wallace strolled in about week number 4, and you guys are doing great. Yeah, because I always said, coming up next is 60 minutes. You know what I'm saying?
What is your favorite moment, though, or story that, if all the years?
Well, let me go to the night that Jimmy the Greek and I had our little fisticuffs in a New York saloon. Okay. And let me tell everybody, Jimmy objected to the fact that he thought I cut him short. Everybody's got to remember, we only had about 28 minutes of airtime. So I had to dish it out to everybody. Okay. So I was living in Los Angeles at the time. Actually, I was working with Connie Chung on the news in LA, and then I'd fly in for the NFL Today. So I got a call the morning after I returned to LA. We're going to fire the Greek. We're going to get rid of him. I said, hey, hold on. Let me get back to you a little bit. And I went back. I talked to my wife, Arlene. I said, Arlene, I don't want the Greek's blood on my hands because we had an incident. I mean, we're very close. We're like brothers. So I thought about calling him back, and I said, please don't fire the Greek. We'll find a way. Okay. So we knew Bob Arum, the boxing guy, really well. And he got us a bell and a couple pair of boxing gloves, and we opened up the next week and made light of it, and life went on from there. So, it's the people, Dan. I just loved working with the people that we had. Phyllis left us for a while. because she thought she was going to become an Oscar-winning movie star. And Jane Kennedy was brought in after that, and it was such a delight. Jane was loved by the players when she would go out for the interviews. And then Phyllis came back a little bit later. Things didn't quite work out in Hollywood, but it was the people that I dealt with that I loved.
Who got the better of the fight?
Well, the Greek hit me in the side. It wasn't a very tough blow. My brother might have got the best of it, but the smartest guy in the bar was the bartender, and he turned the lights off, okay? And so nobody could see anybody. Okay, so it kind of calmed down, okay? But what happened was, I was at a table when the Greek came in, but sitting at the bar was a guy who worked on the city desk of the New York Post. And he ran back, and of course, bada bang, there's the picture of the Greek and Phyllis, and off we go. If he hadn't been in there having a cold one, okay, between shifts, I don't think anybody would have known about it, to tell you the truth. But yeah, it was on in an instant and over in an instant.
That's Brent Musberger. I mean, he's in his 80s. That's as good as it gets. A couple of interesting takeaways. Let's put the story about the fight with the Greek aside for a second here. Number one, he says that prior to the NFL Today coming on, I think it was 1976, so it was less than 50 years ago, that they would record the pregame show on Friday night, and I think it was only 15 minutes. It was Jack Whitaker and Pat Summerall, as he said, and they were both off to do games. See, they couldn't do a studio show, a live one anyway, because they were in different locations calling games for CBS. And so that had to do. So if anything developed between Friday night and when the show went on, I guess 12:45 on Sunday, it wasn't going to be in there. I mean, really. And the You Are Looking Live, as you may have heard, Brent Musberger loves to gamble, and now he's got his own gambling network, Vision. So even then, he was interested in what the line was. He was interested in the weather. And so that was a tip to gamblers when they would come on the air at 12:30 to get their bets in before 1 o'clock. This is the weather in Chicago. Oh, it's snowing. So, maybe bet the under, things like that. And he was a real trailblazer. Not only that, he's put together with this cast of people who I don't think he knows them. He knew Irv Cross because they had actually gone to school together at Northwestern. Irv Cross played at Northwestern, then played for the Philadelphia Eagles. Excellent player. And then transitioned to become the first black studio analyst. I don't even know if they had game analysts who were black then, but he did that. And then real trailblazing stuff. You're bringing in Phyllis George, a former Miss America. She knew, I guess, a little bit about sports, but she certainly wasn't an expert on football. And her most famous interview was with Roger Staubach. And she was talking to him, about his image versus Joe Namath's image. And Staubach gave one of his greatest quotes where he said, look, I like sex just as much as Joe Namath. I just like to do it with one girl, meaning his wife. And so, that kind of stuff might not have happened with a male doing the interview with him. So, Phyllis was good at those kind of things. And, she added some cheer to the set, and let's face it, she was nice to look at. That was important in television. And Jimmy the Greek, who, was what? A guy who kind of made himself into a name. He's the one who would set the line and had famously set the line for the Super Bowl between the Jets and the Colts when he made the Colts 18-point favorites. Like, his claim to fame was as someone who was wildly incorrect, I guess is the way to look at it. But, he was something that Pete Rozelle understood, fans wanted. You couldn't, gamble, obviously, on the NFL then legally. But he knew people were doing it, and he knew that would raise the interest, and so you had sort of a wink-wink. They were not allowed to discuss point spreads. They had two columns for the Greek, one for each team, and whoever got the more check marks, I should say, was the one you went with. And if one side had most of the check marks, if not all of them, then you give the points. You know what I mean? So those were the kind of things that went on with that. But, the fact that this guy, Brent Musberger, who meant so much to the growth of the NFL at that period of time. I mean, really, when the NFL today started, 76, baseball was a bigger deal in this country. The World Series drew more viewers than the Super Bowl. Yeah, believe it or not. And Brent Musberger helped to change that, and it took until he was in his 80s to get into the Football Hall of Fame for the Pete Rozelle Award. That's criminal, and good for Dan for jumping on that. Now, he says that he's going to do the same for Mel Kiper, and if I can be of any assistance on that. In fact, I wrote a rough draft of a letter, which I want to get to him. But he was obviously very successful, and finally getting him in. Also from the Hall of Fame weekend, and Dan talked to him as well last week, was Sterling Sharpe. Sterling Sharpe, in my opinion, should not be in the Hall of Fame. He played 7 years with the Packers. He was great when he played. They never made a Super Bowl when he was there, but he was a terrific player for 7 years. I think the reason that he got in, and this is one of the problems that I have with the Hall of Fame, it's very random. If somebody says the right thing on television about you, or more importantly, if you're on television, that helps you, and that has really hurt Joe Jacoby. Joe has never been on television, so he's sort of been forgotten. He was a finalist twice. They went through this stupid dog and pony show where he had to wait in a hotel room for a knock that never came, and now it's up to the seniors committee to vote him in, and so far that hasn't happened. Well, Sterling Sharpe was helped greatly by his brother Shannon Sharpe going into the Hall of Fame, and Shannon Sharpe had a career with multiple Super Bowls. He won with Denver. He won with Baltimore. And is deserving of being in the Hall of Fame for sure. And he played, I think, 14 years, twice as long as Sterling Sharpe. And he said at his Hall of Fame induction speech that I am the only Hall of Famer who is the second best player in his family. Okay, and that was very helpful for Sterling Sharpe, and he got in. So he's in. And maybe you could say he should be in. But if he's in, Joe Jacoby damn well better be in, but he's not. And that just infuriates me. But Sharpe took the tact of, and he's an interesting character too, because he's had a really great television career, rising television career with ESPN. Very difficult to deal with, as I remember, because he was there same time I was there doing radio, and then just disappeared. I don't think he's done any TV in 15 years, maybe more. But he got in, and he talked to Dan Patrick about that and this, which I'd never heard before, because the reason his career only went 7 years was he had stenosis, the narrowing of the spinal column, which is the same thing that ended Michael Irvin's football career. Irvin played longer and won multiple Super Bowls with the Cowboys, deserving of being in the Hall of Fame for sure. Sterling Sharpe, you could make the case either he is deserving or not deserving, go either way on this, but only 7 years. And my impression was that there was an injury that happened in that 7th year, which ended his career. Well, when he talked about it with Dan Patrick last week, and I never heard this before, this is something he was dealing with since high school, that this neck thing, which ultimately ended his career, goes back to when he was a teenager. This is part of that conversation from Dan's show last week.
Take me back to the injury.
Which part? The part that we found out in high school, and I could have played one play, or I could still be playing. The worst episode on the field was probably against the Atlanta Falcons, but I had 20, 30 episodes over the years based on, my vertebrae and my spine were getting real close together. Laying on the field, having Andre Rison make me laugh, and my friend, teammate from South Carolina, Brad Edwards, coming over to make sure I was okay. There's a lot of moving parts to my injury, Dan. And the thing is there was only two people that were happier than me when my career ended, and that was the two doctors that said I should never play football again.
Oh, wow. But if you played now, there's no technology that if you got this injury now would have enabled you to continue to play?
Well, the thing is my neck at the time it got fixed was probably stronger than anyone else's neck in the National Football League. But you're talking about life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness, and you have to ask yourself, am I willing to take that chance? You know, am I willing to go out there and have everything in this fusion? Do I want to put it to the test? I didn't. I did if I felt like I left something, then I probably would have tried to continue to play.
Oh boy.
But I didn't. I didn't leave anything in football. I didn't. I did what I wanted to do. A lot of people are having a hard time with that statement. I did what I wanted to do, which was just play. Not play in a Super Bowl, not be a Hall of Famer, not be an all-pro player, not lead the league in said category. I just wanted to play. And I got to do that for 7 years, and that was good enough for me.
That's Sterling Sharp from Dan Patrick Show. Now, what I would have been interested in hearing was who passed him on these physicals, going back to high school, college, and the NFL. Maybe it was kept secret. Maybe they didn't do x-rays. I don't know. But it would just seem that if it was known in high school that he had a neck situation where he would be susceptible to paralysis if he took the wrong hit, and that was what ultimately ended it for Michael Irvin. He was told, your next hit could be, the last one you'll ever take on a football field and the last time you walk. So he elected to retire. Sterling Sharp was playing all those years. So it's, 4 years of college at, where did he play? I think it was he play at South Carolina? I believe that's the case. And then to play 7 years with the Green Bay Packers and in the physicals that they do and the information that they collect, nobody ever came across the fact that he had this neck situation, which, as he said, was fixed. I've never heard of anybody getting his neck fused, which is what that is. It's stabilized with rods and things like that. Did you come back and play? I'd be shocked if after the surgery somebody had cleared him to play. Now, he says, maybe I would have if I had unfinished business on the field. Well, I mean, really? You're going to put a guy out there with that? Well, fortunately, and this is really amazing because we had another one over the weekend that looked really scary. As far as I know, there were only 2 paralyzing neck injuries. I say only. I mean, they were awful, devastating, particularly Darryl Stingley, who became a quadriplegic in a game against the Raiders back in 1978, I believe, when he was playing for the Patriots. And I think that may have even been a preseason game. Jack Tatum hit him over the middle, and apparently wasn't a dirty hit, but Tatum never apologized, never went to see him. It's really awful stuff. And he died, I guess, in his 50s. But he was left a quadriplegic from that. And then Mike Utley, who played for the Detroit Lions, he's a paraplegic, has full use of his arms. But those are the only 2 that I know of, and I don't think either one was related to a condition that Sterling Sharp has. All right, so after looking at the tape of that 30-point loss in New England on Friday night, apparently Dan Quinn and Adam Peters have looked at the guys on the field and said, they're so bad, we don't even want our starters practicing against them. So they released a bunch of guys. Now, there is one notable in here, and that's Dominique Hampton, who's a linebacker, a 5th-round pick, not in 2025, but 2024. So you figure a 5th-round pick would stick around for a little while. He's gone. They also cut defensive end. These are names you're not going to recognize, and they signed a bunch of guys. Duke Riley, you heard about yesterday, a special teamer, linebacker, played last year with Miami. Cornerback Antonio Hamilton Sr. was signed. Isang Bassi, cornerback, also. I mean, comings and goings, but it tells you that they looked at the tape and said, we got to get better practice players. Most of these guys they brought in are probably going to be cut. Maybe 1 or 2 of them make the practice squad. Something like that, but that just tells you how awful they looked on Friday night. And I know it's exhibition season, and you can't really read too much into it because we've seen August heroes before. We've seen players, come in here and go, whoa, that guy is terrific. How did he slip through? What's he doing here? How did they get him? And then you find out, oh, yeah, when the final cuts come, they're gone. Because it's hard to judge when you're playing against guys who are going to be bread truck drivers in a few weeks. That's just the reality of it. Now, the Pittsburgh media gets it. Pittsburgh played Jacksonville on Saturday, and they won the game. For whatever a preseason game is worth, they won 31-25. And Mike Tomlin, the coach, he doesn't just get up there and say, do you have any questions? He makes an opening statement. Dan Quinn does the same thing. And after the game in Jacksonville, Tomlin said, it was really a good evening's work. We put in a lot of situations and got a chance to watch people perform in them. A 2-minute drive before the half, kind of highlighting some of that. I thought we did a nice job of not beating our own butt. We kept pre-snap penalties virtually to a minimum. I think we had one. We played a pretty clean game for our first game out. We gave a lot of people opportunities, and that's what this was about. Okay? That was his opening statement. Apparently, as you'll hear here, had answered every question that reporters had.
Hopefully be better the next time out. I'll pause and open it up for questions.
Anyone? All right.
Thank you.
That was easy. Man, I'm telling you.
That's it. Not a single question. And the Pittsburgh media gets it because it was the first preseason game. It's playing a lot of guys like the Commanders who won't be on the team this year. And most importantly, Aaron Rodgers didn't play. So what is there to ask? There really isn't that much to ask. It was a 31-25 game. Now, I guess there wasn't any significant injury, although most of the time when a coach is asked in the postgame about injuries, they'll have to say, I'll have to talk to the trainer, and I haven't had a chance to do that. So we don't know. But the Pittsburgh media, which has been, let's face it, they've been covering Mike Tomlin. How long has he been there? 17, 18 years? So they know him, and they know when the statements that he makes, what they essentially mean. But, it just is an indication of how meaningless this stuff is. And we're going to have before long, I'll bet you even before there's a chance to open up the contract in 2019, that they will approach the Players Association, which is, by the way, in chaos right now because of the reporting from Pablo Torre and Don Van Natta. The director, Lloyd Howell, is gone. CJ Treader, the center who is running the former center, he's gone. They're a mess right now. But when they get together, the owners are going to come to them and say, here's $1 billion, shut up and play an 18th game. So now we're going to be down to 2 preseason games. And when you play 2 preseason games, what does that mean? You're going to have the first one where the starters play maybe up to a quarter, and then the second one, they're not going to play at all. And I believe in my lifetime, we will see a 20-game season and no exhibition games. They can play in college. That's the other thing about college. College, even more so now because of the transfer portal, all these players coming and going, they managed to play regular season games without exhibition games. And, yes, a lot of these schools will open up against the hyphenated teams that they beat up on. But because of television, we're seeing some top-line matchups to start the season. I believe it's Labor Day weekend that Ohio State and Texas play. Yeah, that could be the national championship. And so they can do it. And NFL teams, they work out, off season. They have the mini camp. They have the training camp. You don't have to have these games. The reason they have these games is because of television. There's television money in it. And it used to be that they played 6. They played 6 of them and only 14 regular season games. And the reason wasn't as much television as it was gate. And sometimes they would play in other places to try and get a gate when you knew you couldn't get it at home, or drum up support for football, like the famous Brian Mitchell game 35 years ago when they opened up the season at Carolina. I think they were playing in Atlanta, might have been Atlanta, to drum up support for a team in Carolina, which they got 4 or 5 years later. So That's that's exhibition season for you, and good for the Pittsburgh media for not wasting any time asking insipid questions about meaningless football that was played in the first week of August. Wait till you see Aaron Rodgers on the field. Wait till you have a little bit more continuity with the regulars before you do that. This, by the way, if you missed this, Quinn Ewers played for the Dolphins this past weekend. Now, Quinn Ewers was faced with an interesting decision because after finishing up his third season at Texas this past year, he had the opportunity to either come back. I don't know how realistic that was because I'm sure he was told, hey, it's Arch Manning's turn. You're going to have to go. But if he left, there were reports that he had $8 million waiting for him at, I don't know what school it was. Might have been Miami. He could have gone there. Instead, he declared for the NFL draft. He went in the seventh round. And he got to play against the Bears this past weekend. They did play starters. Tua Tagovailoa played. His backup, Zach Wilson, they played. And then Ewers came in. He was horrible against guys who are not going to be on the team for Chicago. 5 of 18, he threw for 91 yards. That's 5.1 yards per completion. His passer rating was 48.1. He took 2 sacks and fumbled twice and had no rushing yards. It might have been his biggest payday had he come back and played this year for Miami with his remaining year of eligibility. If he does turn out to be a pretty good quarterback and, you could throw out an exhibition game and say, well, it's just getting his feet wet. You do start the clock on money. Like, that was a lot of the Caleb Williams talk. Well, if he could make, $6 million staying at USC, why would he go to the NFL? Well, he got a $25 million signing bonus. And so it made sense to start the clock on that. And also you want to start the clock on the second contract. Right? You want to get going towards the big money if he's one of them. Like at this point, you'd have to say that Jaden Daniels is tracking to become a $70 million a year quarterback. And if Caleb Williams is in that class, he will also get that kind of money. They'll come up at the same time for a contract. If Quinn Ewers turns out to be a really good quarterback, I mean, even backup money is like $10 million a year, as we see here with Marcus Mariota. And if he's good enough to be a starter somewhere, it can be one hell of a lot more. But you'd have to say, based on the fact that he slid all the way to the 7th round, meaning his salary this year is well under $1 million, and so far in what is the most comfortable situation to walk into, playing against third-string guys and guys who aren't going to be on the other team, that you perform as badly as you did, fumbled twice, 5 of 18, and sacked twice, that's not so good. All right, coming up in the next hour, more football. Interesting stuff from Drew Brees about heights of quarterbacks, including one he played with, Doug Flutie. Well, you hear what he has to say about that and more as we continue. It's the Andy Pollin Show, ESPN 630. There is nothing like an August hero. And the greatest August hero in the history of the Commanders / Washington football team / Redskins franchise is Babe Laufenberg. Babe Laufenberg, a couple of Augusts in a row, was absolutely terrific leading comebacks in exhibition games. Do you know that Babe Laufenberg never took a regular season snap for the Redskins? He was here a couple of times. Second time after Joe Theismann broke his leg. But he never played. And people go, oh, look at Babe Laufenberg. That is absolutely incredible. So take it with a grain of salt, both the good and the bad from exhibition games. The Commanders did, though, make a bunch of roster moves today in response to what they saw on tape from the awful performance that they had in New England on Friday night. Not necessarily any names that you're going to recognize. That's just not, that's just not the way that these moves are made. Although I think you could say Dominique Hampton, who was a fifth-round pick last year, being released might be significant. It might be, I guess the first crack in the Peters regime would be the Terry McLaurin contract situation. Now, We don't necessarily know the numbers, their numbers being reported, and if what's being reported is true, it does seem like they're lowballing him, which is hard to understand. Is he worth top 5 money? Probably not, especially since he's turning 30 next month. But that would be the one where you go, wow, I thought that everything they did, they turned water into wine. Well, what's going on here? So to have failed on a 5th-round pick, it's not like the Ron Rivera era where all 4 of their first-round draft picks didn't even play with the team more than 2 years. It's just absolutely ridiculous, including the second. Oh, I guess he played 2.5 years, but the second pick of the draft, Chase Young, lasted 2.5 years and just become sort of a pretty good defensive end with New Orleans. Yeah. So it's not that bad. But they obviously looked at what they saw on tape and said, we not only have to have better players here, got to have better players to practice against. Now, they had signed just like a week or so ago, Lucas Niang, who was a tackle, played with Kansas City, a winning pedigree, unfortunately tore his ACL in the game, so he was placed on IR, and they'll probably work out an injury settlement with him. And Kevon Seymour, a cornerback, also placed on injured reserve. I don't know if that's going to be season-long or anything like that. Drew Brees showed up last week on the Dan Patrick Show, and Drew Brees, Hall of Fame quarterback. He's not eligible yet for consideration. Won a Super Bowl in New Orleans, rescued that city in many ways. I mean, it was after Katrina. I think the first year they had to play games in San Antonio because they couldn't get the Superdome fixed up in time. And then, helped to lead the city back. He was coming off a devastating shoulder injury in San Diego. Miami looked at him, but they were afraid to sign him because of that. And he winds up in New Orleans, and the rest is history. And he is, very good in interviews, but he was a failure in broadcasting, despite what you're going to hear him say here. He got an opportunity, and this is one of the problems with the way broadcasting works right now. As great as John Madden was, when John Madden started doing it, they didn't put him on the top game. He earned that over the course of time and worked with several different partners who helped him along the way, including the great Vern Lundquist. And then when he got paired with Pat Summerall, he was polished and ready to go. Well, the way things work now, if you're a big enough name, they're going to put you in the national spotlight right away. So Drew Brees is doing Sunday Night Football on NBC. He also did the studio show, which he didn't seem that interested in and wasn't very good at it. But I think he's a bit delusional here when he's talking to Dan last week about his broadcasting career and why it didn't work out. And then you'll hear him say that if he did it today, he would be a top 3 broadcaster. No, he wouldn't. He wasn't good. He wasn't good at it. He needs a lot of work. Probably needs to do, and he did some Notre Dame games as well, but he needs to do a lot of lesser profile games, work his way up. But this is Drew Brees on his side of why he's not broadcasting today and why it only was a kind of a one-and-done situation with NBC.
I get the feeling that the perception is that somehow, I failed at being a broadcaster. I got 2 opportunities to broadcast NFL games, and they were like 8 weeks apart. I did one game in New Orleans for Thanksgiving, and I did one playoff game. Otherwise, I broadcasted Notre Dame football. But really, when I took that job with NBC, the idea was to work with some of the best people in the business, the Mike Tirico, Tony Dungy, Rob Hyland, like Fred Gaudelli, all the guys that are legendary guys in that organization. And, man, I'm so thankful that I had that opportunity. But at the same time, what I really did for the most part was sit behind a desk and do the Sunday Night Football Night in America, and then, a bunch of stuff in stadium at the desk, and then the Super Bowl broadcast, but again, at the desk. So at the end of the day, like I chuckle because even as I look at the landscape right now, man, I have so much respect for a lot of guys in the booth right now. But I'd step in the booth right now and be a top 3 guy, like without question. And then you give me a few years and I could be the best. So look, I love the game. I love talking about the game. I feel like I have an insight to the game that is pretty unique, given my playing experience. I see the game a totally different way. I process it a different way. And so even as I watch games now, and I just kind of listen to, the commentary and this and that, and what I'm seeing, I just feel like there's so much more to add. And so, look, at the end of the day, I'm going to wait for the right opportunity. And, hopefully it comes along. And if it doesn't, that's okay too, because I'm coaching ball and I'm involved in the game in so many other ways. But I do feel like I have a ton of value to add in the booth. And so I'm appreciative of Netflix giving me the opportunity to broadcast on Christmas Day. And I'm not sure exactly which game that's going to be. There's 2 on the slate, but that'll be a lot of fun.
Yeah, but it'd be like asking you to start a game maybe in the preseason, then start a game, late in a season and say you weren't consistent. You need repetition in this. You got to be there week in and week out.
Yeah, absolutely. And so that it's I think the unfortunate part about just that year was that the thing I wanted to do most was broadcast NFL games. The thing I had the opportunity to do the least was broadcast NFL games. Now I had a chance to do everything, right? I was in studio, I was at the stadium, did the Super Bowl pregame. I broadcast a little college. I broadcasted a little NFL. So I got exposure to everything. And man, I retained it all, like every bit of coaching from all those guys. And I'm very appreciative of that. But, when I departed because I wanted to spend more time with my kids on the weekends coaching ball. And unfortunately, that was the schedule didn't work out, having to fly to Connecticut, every week, and also doing the Notre Dame games. So it was my decision to step away from NBC. It was not theirs. They wanted me back. And again, I felt like I had a great relationship with them during that time. Unfortunately, I think it got reported a little bit differently.
Yeah.
And now somehow that's become the narrative. It could not be further from the truth. You can go talk to Pete Bavacqua, who is the head of NBC Sports. You can go talk to Sam Flood. You can go talk to any of those guys. Mike Tirico, Rob Hyland. Man, I had a great relationship with those guys, and they wanted me back. Unfortunately, the schedule just didn't work, given the fact that I wasn't really able to do what I wanted to do, which was broadcast NFL games.
Well, okay, and that's fine, but you kind of have to earn that unless your name is Tom Brady. Now, that he says if he stepped in the booth today, he would be a top 3 guy. Well, let's look at that. Would he be better than Tony Romo now? Yeah, maybe. Not Tony Romo 5 years ago. Tony Romo has slipped, but I think Tony Romo still is better than Drew Brees was. There was no emotion, no enthusiasm from him in the couple games I heard him work. And would he be better than Brady? Maybe, but Brady brings such prestige to that. I don't think that you could put him there. The guy that Brady bumped, Greg Olson, he may be the best analyst out there. I wonder what's happening with him. Would he be the next in line for Chris Collinsworth? Collinsworth is better than Brees. Collinsworth has been doing it for a long time. He understands the medium. He knows how to do it. So, don't give us that just because you work hard and you're a driven guy, that right now you'd be number 3 and before long you'd be number 1. It's not like playing quarterback. It's a lot different than that. And you got to take as many reps as you can get. If it was only 2 games that they were giving you, do some more games. Find out a way to do it. But don't do it that way, because you're not gonna be great at it, and then you're in the spotlight because it's national TV. Used to be that you would go to like the number 5 team. Only a small portion of the country would see you do games, and you get better. But that's the modern way that it's done here. And boy, was that who's the tight end for Dallas who moved there and went to Monday Night Football and was a disaster, one and done, never did it again, because you got to learn how to do it. Just because you're a name doesn't mean that you're necessarily going to succeed at that. All right, more from Drew Brees, and this is an interesting thing that he had to say about evaluating quarterbacks and a stat that they don't necessarily take into consideration.
I think one of the greatest traits of a quarterback that is never discussed, especially in the evaluation of it, is their ability to avoid sacks and avoid negative plays. That when you just start looking at the probabilities and the percentages of success on 3rd and 6 versus 3rd and 10, and just like your ability to avoid negative plays. And a lot of times too, that could just be, hey, I have a decision when I walk up to the line of scrimmage to run the ball right, run the ball left, to run it inside, to run it outside. And the decision that you make in large part could be the difference between a 2 or 3 yard gain or a 1 yard loss. And so there's so many of these decisions that are made within the framework of a game where if I'm evaluating QBs and I'm sitting there watching the tape, I want to know what type of decision maker they are, because if they are making more good decisions, then good results will follow. There's a lot of things that we can fix fundamentally and whatever. Hey, you missed a throw, but you threw it to the right place and you're on time. That's fine. We can fix that, right? But if you have a great decision-making process and you're consistently making good decisions and you're avoiding sacks and you're putting yourself in favorable positions, meaning high probability for success positions, then you're going to win a ton of games. And I think when you really start to break it down, that's what you're looking for.
Yeah, Caleb Williams last year, I think he was sacked like 58 times. So that's an interesting one. This was the most interesting part of the conversation. And Drew Brees lasted until the second round of the draft in 1999, coming out of Purdue. He led them to a Rose Bowl because he's listed at 6 feet and, maybe like 5'10", 5'11" at best. And he went on to have a 20-year Hall of Fame career. He defied the odds and had a career that many didn't expect. Russell Wilson, the same thing. Kyler Murray, guys like that who were thought to be undersized, although Murray was the number one pick of the draft. Russell Wilson lasted till the third round of the draft. But this is something I'd never heard before, and you think about guys who come along at the right time and the wrong time, like. For example, if you were a 7-footer in college basketball 30 years ago, you might be the number one pick of the draft. If you're a 7-footer in college now, maybe you get drafted, depending on how good you are, but the game is played differently. The game isn't played all that differently now than it was, 25, 30 years ago, but the perception of the position of quarterback has changed greatly. And you look at the career of Doug Flutie. Now, he got a couple of bites of the apple in the NFL. He played in the USFL, was a Donald Trump signing with the New Jersey Generals, and then got to play with the Patriots and the Bears, and was in and out of the league a bunch of times, and in between was winning a bunch of Grey Cups while he was in Canada. This is Brees with a very good point about his career and how we might view Doug Flutie if he were coming along today than 40 years ago when he came out of Boston College.
I don't think you can be too short. Look, there's that prototype size that maybe we all have in our mind for each position. In fact, I'm sure there's a lot of scouts that made a great living, through the years with just having that mold or that model for each position. I know that Sean Payton had a little bit of that because he got it from Parcells. Like I was in these discussions all the time as to what certain positions were supposed to look like. And apparently, the only one that could have quite a bit of variation was the running back position. He's like Parcells used to say they come in all shapes and sizes. They just need to have a big lower half, right? Otherwise, they're going to constantly be in the shop, so to speak. They're going to be injured. So I mean, like the Darren Sproles is right, 5'7", 180 pounds, but was one of the most dynamic players in the history of the NFL. I think from a quarterback perspective, keep in mind too, not only was I short, but I came in the league behind a guy named Doug Flutie, who, in my opinion, is one of the greatest quarterbacks in all of professional football. And obviously he played every level of it, from the USFL to the CFL to the NFL. But he was doing things that were ahead of his time. And I don't think he gets the appreciation for it. He was Patrick Mahomes before Patrick Mahomes. Everything you see Mahomes do, I saw Flutie do every day in practice, from the no-look throws to the back shoulder throws to just like manipulating defenders with his eyes, buying time. Like he just had such an incredible feel for the game. And a lot of the things he did out of survival, right? Like you think about it, I think some of the greatest innovations in history is because, hey, there was a problem that needed to be solved, or you had a limitation that you had to overcome in some way with some other sort of talent. And so, like, truly, he did things out of survival. Like, he wouldn't have been able to play the position if he wasn't able to do these things. But I had a front row seat to this for 4 years with the San Diego Chargers, and some as his backup, and then in other cases, he is my backup. But nonetheless, he was an incredible mentor for me, and I learned so much from him. And so, therefore, I would say he played the game at 5'9.5" or whatever Doug was. I don't think that's a limitation.
Interesting, yeah. I wonder about that because now he did get a chance to play. Remember, he played in a playoff game against the Redskins. Jim McMahon was hurt all the time, And I believe it was the Darrell Green game where he returned that punt. I think Flutie was the quarterback for the Bears. The other one was Steve Fuller. So he had his chances, but because of the prejudice against height, I don't think he ever really got a fair chance until finally he came back with the Buffalo Bills and was a sensation with Flutie Flakes and played in San Diego and then wrapped up with the Patriots when he was like in his 40s, like 42, 43 years old. So something. We did have a 70-yard field goal over the weekend, which technically is a record, doesn't count because it was exhibition. But Cam Little for Jacksonville hit the kick just before halftime in that loss to the Steelers, 30-25. No kicker had ever made, as far as anyone can tell, college, pro, high school, whatever, had ever made a 70-yard field goal. The previous record was held by Abilene Christian's Ove Johansson, who hit a 69-yarder back in 1976. He is the one that's credited with the record, and there's film of it, so there's proof that it was made. There was a high schooler named Dirk Burgonge, Brogonone, kicking for Reno High in 1985, hit a 68-yarder. And then there were 4 kickers at the college level who had 67-yarders. 2 of them I remember from that 1977 season. Steve Little for Arkansas, Russell Erxleben from Texas. Following year, Joe Williams, Wichita State, kicked a 67-yarder. And then Tom Odell for Fort Hays State in 1988. However, back in those days, up until 1989, college kickers were allowed to use a 1 to 2 inch kicking block. So they had the ball off the ground. So that was certainly helpful. I do remember Steve Little was a real tragedy. He got drafted by the St. Louis Cardinals and then was paralyzed in a car accident like his second year. That was awful. Russell Erxleben was so good that he was a first-round pick of the Saints to be both the kicker and the punter. Didn't even kick in the pros. Wound up being a punter for them. So, just because you do that in college with the kicking tee doesn't necessarily mean you're going to be able to do that. Now, there has been a 70-yarder attempted. Brandon Aubrey tried a 70-yarder in the regular season last December against the Carolina Panthers for Dallas. The 66-yarder is the record by Justin Tucker. He did that in 2021 at the Gun indoors against Detroit, which I think is significant. But he will get a chance, obviously, to kick again in the league. But here's the takeaway on this. If you hit a 70-yard field goal, realize that if a team takes a touchback and they get the ball at the 30-yard line, in order to kick a 70-yarder, you only have to move the ball 13 yards. And you just wonder, as kickers get more and more advanced, as kids start out rather than, wanting to play quarterback or running back, they start training to be kickers when they're like 6 or 7 years old. Will we have a kicker who hits consistently enough that, you're trying 70-yarders on a regular basis? I mean, it could happen. And I don't know if that's necessarily good for the league. A lot of these, most of these long field goals are tried at the end of the half or the end of the game. The famous one, Tom Dempsey in 1970, that was at the end of the game against the Detroit Lions. It actually wound up costing New Orleans the number 1 pick. That's how they didn't get Jim Plunkett and instead got Archie Manning. But they attempted that field goal from like their own 35-yard line, right? Because the goalposts were up against the goal line. But either way, if kickers are going to hit these field goals on a consistent basis, a relatively consistent, let's say 50%, and it could happen. Then what? What does the NFL do about that? Because they've already moved back the extra point, which I think has ultimately been a good thing. There's at least some interest in that. But what happens with field goals if you got kickers kicking 70-yarders? Crazy, right? That's enough for me. Back from vacation for one day. Graham is coming up next, and I will be back here tomorrow morning at 9 a.m.